Metabolic health is the primary driver to delay the onset of the 4 horsemen that are going to kill you. When a cancer patient gets cancer and they get a high tumor burden, that creates inflammation in the body, and that inflammation eats up skeletal muscle mass. But we do know that ketones have anti-catabolic effects. That more or less kind of cripples the cancer's ability to protect itself from oxidative stress. That can be achieved with ketone supplementation, but it's going to work better with a well-formulated diet. The big vision is to create like metabolic treatment centers.
How do you integrate this unbelievably rapid pursuit of technology and science?
You need to learn to ask the right questions. The trajectory of science right now, and especially with AI, is going to help bridge the gap between scientific understanding and philosophy and spiritual understanding. I'm going to be replaced. So I think of ketone supplements as a training aid. It's something that you take over a protracted period of time to enhance the adaptive response to exercise.
One of the questions I like to start with is like, what's interesting to you right now? And it sounds like you've got this like wide array of ways to answer that.
Yeah.
And 12 different projects. Give or take?
Yeah, if you spread them out, I'd say like 3 or 4 big ones, and then like a bunch of little pet projects, I think.
Yeah, and so what's sort of top of mind or like most exciting for you right now?
Yeah, I would say it's hard to like say what's most exciting, but I think the idea of creating, and we were talking about this earlier, a very comprehensive metabolic-based therapy for cancer. We published recently the framework for ketone metabolic therapy for managing glioblastoma, which is the most deadly form of cancer. But that same framework can be applied to pretty much most cancers that are, have the metabolic transformation that makes it amenable to use this metabolic-based therapy. And that would be sort of under the umbrella of most cancers. So. And then the framework is such that there's a dietary therapy, there's metabolic biomarkers, there's a metabolic biomarker profile that you have to maintain, and then there's like other add-ons. And we talked about hyperbaric oxygen, and there's like cancer-specific metabolic drugs that target metabolism, and then many different aspects.
So how much of that can we go into? So can we go into some of these metabolic markers that are a requirement to things knock it out? Yeah, I'd love to start there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So we talking things like blood glucose? Are we talking things like A1C? Like what are we looking at?
Yep. So ketone metabolic therapy the biggest lever would be achieving and maintaining a glucose-ketone index, which is the millimolar concentration of glucose over ketones. And for example, if your glucose level was 4 and your ketone levels were 4, that would be a glucose-ketone index of 1. That would be pretty hard to achieve, like getting your ketones that high. So say, for example, your glucose is 4 millimolar, but you do like a modified ketogenic diet, most people can get to about 1 millimolar, and that would be a glucose-ketone index of 4. So that would be essentially the threshold for having a therapeutic response for the metabolic management of cancer. So under those conditions, like largely the cancers that are most aggressive and glycolytic will significantly slow down or fail to grow under that metabolic environment with those metabolic biomarkers. So it's not just glucose and ketones, and I could talk about how that could target, cancer growth and metabolism, but also the downstream, the effects of insulin, for example. So there's a level of insulin suppression associated with a glucose-ketone index of between 1 and 4. And that suppression of insulin and insulin signaling is associated with the growth factors that make the cancer grow. But that just really sets the stage for other modalities that would further be augmented by that physiological metabolic state, if that makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
So you achieve and maintain that physiological metabolic state, and then you can come in with a wide range. You can come in with chemotherapy, radiation, or immune-based therapy. Checkpoint inhibitors are enhanced by ketone metabolic therapy, and I'm working with Moffitt Cancer Center on developing protocols for that. So that's one area, but we are very focused on non-toxic metabolic management of cancer. So that would be, for example, achieving that glucose-ketone index, and that's more or less a personalized, engineered ketogenic diet for the patient. And they would have to wear, ideally, like a ketone monitoring system. Like I'm wearing a continuous ketone monitor.
Yep.
It's like a continuous glucose monitor, but it measures ketones. And on the other arm, I have a continuous glucose monitor, right? So that will give me a window at this point in time right now. I can look at my phone and see my glucose-ketone index. So then I could therapeutically adjust that based upon nutrition, a dietary approach, or easily like a supplementation. So supplementation would be beta-hydroxybutyrate, the D and the L enantiomer of beta-hydroxybutyrate. They both have like independent effects and different pharmacokinetic profiles. And then that could be, for example, a salt of that. That could be the beta-hydroxybutyrate is combined with sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. And you spread that across electrolytes. So it's like an electrolyte formula that's also giving your body the ketones. And then you could formulate that with ketogenic fats, like medium-chain triglyceride fats, and that kind of will help boost ketone levels and keep them elevated for longer when you mix it with exogenous ketones. So this is like a formula that could be taken by the patient with meals 3 times a day. And that would sort of further lower the glucose-ketone index, but the diet does a lot of the major lifting. And then a lot of, cancer, people who research cancer are very much into the supplementation because that's an easy way out. I don't think that's optimal. I think there's a lot that can be achieved with ketone supplementation, but it's going to work better with a well-formulated diet. And then you have things like metformin, you have the GLP-1s, you have SGLT2 inhibitors that can lower glucose and actually elevate ketones through, whether it be appetite suppression, just, eliminating glucose, or metformin kind of has a lot of independent effects. So you can further, change that glucose-ketone index and lower it. And then we look at hyperbaric oxygen therapy in the context of achieving and maintaining that glucose-ketone index. That more or less kind of cripples the cancer's ability to protect itself from oxidative stress. So, chemotherapeutic agents and radiation kill cancer cells through augmenting oxidative stress. So hyperbaric oxygen can reverse tumor hypoxia, and tumors tend to grow as the expanding biomass of a tumor outstrips its ability to the blood supply, essentially. So as a tumor grows, it becomes more hypoxic. That damages the mitochondria more and kicks on more oncogenes to further make the cancer more aggressive. When you do hyperbaric oxygen, that is elevating the tissue levels of oxygen independent of hemoglobin, meaning that hemoglobin is already saturated, but by increasing the barometric pressure, you're pushing oxygen into the plasma, into the liquid component. So that allows, because tumors have like erratic blood vessels, that enables the oxygenated plasma to perfuse into the tumor in a way that a red blood cell can't get to. Yes. And that would reverse the tumor hypoxia, hyperoxygenate the tumor. And when damaged mitochondria are exposed to very high levels of oxygen, we're talking about going from like 10 millimeters of mercury to like 2,000 millimeters of mercury. That oxygen is a substrate for reactive oxygen species. So when the mitochondria, which are damaged in cancer cells, sees that concentration of oxygen, it goes into the electron transport chain and spits out superoxide anion. And because the tumor has a lot of like necrosis and heme proteins, there's like this porphyrin overdrive hypothesis and something called sort of ferroptosis. I don't want to go down that path. It gets complicated. But because there's a lot of free iron in the tumor, that free iron then drives something called the Fenton reaction, and you get a massive burst of oxidative stress. With hyperbaric oxygen therapy, the ketone metabolic therapy inhibits endogenous antioxidant systems and maybe things like hemoxygenase that the cancer uses to protect itself. So you are giving a massive oxidative burst in the context of crippling the cancer's metabolism by restricting glucose, elevating ketones, which have some anti-cancer effects. And it's everything I'm describing is non-toxic, right? So these are like modalities, and then you could use metformin, SGLT2, and some other drugs. These are modalities. Everything I'm describing is like non-toxic, And if that doesn't work, then you can come in like with some of the bigger guns, like checkpoint inhibitors, targeted radiation, and low-dose chemotherapy to further kind of target that. So, it took a long time to develop some of these ideas and get them published, and about a dozen different articles now, starting with like mouse models and then working up. But our lab has been deep into this for, over 15 years. We've been working on this.
Yeah.
It's great to see that clinicians and even places like Moffitt Cancer Center are now open to the idea and embracing it as a means to further augment, their standard of care. They see it as an adjuvant. Anything that can improve their outcomes from what they're doing is what they're interested in. So we're partnering with them. But I think like the big vision is to create like metabolic treatment centers where, you have a trained staff that could, implement this clinically and then measure the biomarkers to ensure they're in that therapeutic range, and then come in with these other modalities.
Because clearly the challenge seems to be, certainly with my dad, is going to be like, adherence. I think you need to be in this therapeutic ketosis, and he doesn't understand what that means.
Yeah.
And so getting him off the sugar, and like they're trying to put him on like Boost, and I was like, who is telling you to drink Boost? Crazy. So one of the things that I sort of want to double click on there was, you mentioned the use of supplements. So it sounds like it's not a requirement to get into therapeutic ketosis dietarily, as long as you have the supplements to augment.
Yeah. So there's an emerging area of research now looking at basically ketones as an epigenetic modifier, like modulating gene expression, like actually like increasing tumor suppressor genes and like suppressing oncogenic drivers,
just
like driver genes.
It doesn't have to be created by your body.
Beta-hydroxybutyrate, And then beta-hydroxybutyrate, we think the D and the L enantiomer, there's like mirror images of one another, that the mere presence of that in several animal models, and now they're moving it to clinical trials. So beta-hydroxybutyrate can augment the adaptive immune system to make, when you take something called a PD-1 inhibitor, that's called a checkpoint immune therapy. When a patient gets on that, the adaptive immune system has a much more robust response, and then that further augments the anti-cancer immunity that's sort of activated by that drug. So that's like the leading, that's like the cutting edge class of immune-based therapies now. And ketone metabolic therapy, which could be dietary therapy, but there's like a bigger focus on this ketone supplement therapy as a means to augment, that immune response to the checkpoint inhibitor. So we're kind of focusing on that for a couple of different types of cancers right now. And I think that's a really, really interesting area to explore, because that's like, you're getting into a range. Not that immune-based therapies do have side effects, but a good thing about ketone metabolic therapy, it tends to suppress side effects. It tends to decrease inflammation. It tends to, help the patient, recover. Like if they're taking chemotherapy, it can help with like chemo brain, the brain fog, the inflammation, and help decrease a lot of the side effects associated, and also enhance metabolic biomarkers. And that could be everything from hemoglobin A1C, lowers triglycerides, elevates HDL, HSCRP is suppressed, insulin levels go down. So these are all biomarkers that are like tightly linked to outcomes. So you're taking a metabolic-based therapy that's associated with improved, and the ketones also have anti-catabolic effects. So by inhibiting tumor necrosis factor, and also IL-1 beta and sort of IL-6, the elevation. So these inflammatory cytokines play a role in what's called a cancer cachexia, which is muscle wasting. When a cancer patient gets cancer and they get a high tumor burden, that creates inflammation in the body, and that inflammation eats up skeletal muscle mass and tissue and organ mass. So you typically have this, so you have cancer-specific wasting called cancer cachexia, and that's usually coupled with age-related sarcopenia, because cancer patients are usually older. Right. And on top of that, if you give chemo you have chemo-induced sarcopenia and muscle wasting. So ideally, I think, actually some bodybuilding drugs, and they actually are looking at the SARMs, the I think actually the first SARM, ostarine, I guess. Yeah, I think there's a Lancet paper that was like the first application of that drug. I'm not into that research, but I do think there's potential there. But we do know that ketones have anti-catabolic effects. So they can, my PhD student, Dr. Andrew Kutnick, his whole PhD dissertation was looking at the effects of ketones on mitigating cancer cachexia. And we took it another step further where we gave something called lipopolysaccharide, LPS, which creates like massive inflammation and muscle wasting. So it also mitigated sort of the inflammation and the anorexia, muscle wasting associated with LPS. So we have, you have a metabolite that your body makes that you can elevate through a dietary therapy and also supplement. And that can augment cancer therapy in a positive way. And that could be, reducing side effects and increasing, beneficial outcomes. So that's a really ripe area of research that has taken a decade to do and publish before we started actually working with like cancer treatment centers. And I think there's a lot to do. And I think we're on the cusp of really understanding the dosage, scheduling, and timing that needs to be worked out more for different types of cancers. And we focus on brain cancer mostly. We're doing lung cancer, but brain cancer is sort of the easy one because ketogenic diets are used for epilepsy and seizure disorders. So it's like brain cancer patients usually have seizures. So you're like treating the seizures, getting them off anti-seizure drugs, because that's like really bad. It totally knocks the cancer. It has an impact on the quality of life for the cancer patient. So you could like reduce that or eliminate that class of drug. And then the big thing is being able to measure the biomarkers sort of in real time, have that data go onto a platform where the clinical team can see it and then make adjustments through telemedicine and through an app. So that's what we're working on, developing like an app-based system that could be, used for that.
Super cool. So that's going to be a lot for the listeners to digest.
Yeah.
But the one question, no, it's okay, man. That's huge. And we can unpack a lot of that. But one of the things that comes to mind is, are you able to discuss sort of success rate you've had? Like, is it different success rate, different types of cancer? Because I mean, that would be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah. So as of now, so there's a lot of the preclinical animal model data that started to come out maybe about 20 years ago. And then maybe in 2014 or 15, we started doing more or less being involved in case studies, case series, mostly with brain cancer patients. And then, and also anecdotal reports, because there's a lot of cancer treatment centers that do not want to touch this, right? Because it's such an out of the box way of thinking. But okay, so if you kind of go back 15 years ago on clinicaltrials.gov. Let's just choose that. So clinicaltrials.gov is actually the website where a clinical trial needs to be registered for that to, be part of the system essentially. And in 2010, I think there was I don't think there was any clinical trials for ketogenic therapies in cancer. Right. So right now we have about 47 or 48 human clinical trials on using ketone metabolic therapy. And that could be a dietary therapy or a diet therapy with supplementation. So we have 47 clinical trials that have been approved. The IRB process have been approved. And I think maybe about a third of them are funded by a federal agency. So that would be the National Institutes of Health or the Department of Health, Department of Defense. They actually fund cancer research. So there's a lot of clinical trials right now being done. So we have some, but the thing with, this type of therapy in cancer patients is that you need to look over 5 years.
Right.
So this is a very new area of research. The clinical trials really started coming, hitting clinicaltrials.gov about 5 years ago, and those trials are in process now. If you go to a systematic review or meta-analysis, the last comprehensive one was 2020, and that was data looking at from 2010 to 2019. That essentially showed that ketogenic diet therapy improved quality of life for patients and various metabolic biomarkers, and also like looked at, reduced like the FDG PET scan, intensity, like the tumor burden and tumor load. But at that time, the 2020 is really the last comprehensive review. It essentially said that more randomized, controlled, clinical trials are needed to get this metabolic-based therapy as the standard of care. So I'm actually in communication with that author, and we want to do like a 2025 review. So I think the data over the last 5 years would sort of point to the use of these therapies, at least for things like brain cancer or highly glycolytic cancers that sort of thrive off glucose and inflammation is another driver.
Yeah. So what does that look like for the audience? Like when the rubber meets the road, dietarily, like what does an average day look like for someone there? Is it just simply like avoiding all things carbohydrate based, intentionally subjecting yourself to like higher dietary fat intake, being as ketogenic as you can, no vegetables, primarily small amounts of meat and high amounts of dietary fat?
Yeah, well, I think maybe the most important thing to discuss is really there is no cure for cancer. I mean, unless you catch it really early, like stage 1, breast cancer, things like that. So prevention is the cure. And in 2024, there was probably the biggest review on preventable strategies, modifiable strategies for cancer prevention. And this journal, it's like the flagship journal of the American Cancer Association. It has an impact factor of over 500. That's like huge, right? So, and they looked at data over, I believe, maybe like 17 years or something like that. And then they list like the 12 modifiable risk factors for cancer. And of the 12, 9 of them were tightly linked to metabolic health.
Sure.
So our focus has been metabolic health. So that's obesity. The first one was smoking, but now actually it looks like for the next year or two that obesity is going to take over smoking because there's less people smoking, but obesity rates are going up. But then there's like things associated with diet, like H. pylori that causes like GI cancers. There's a whole list like insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, like all these metabolic things are driving cancers. And certain cancers are really driven by metabolic health, or impaired metabolic health. So every GI cancer, like pancreatic cancer, stomach cancer, liver cancer rates have tripled since 1980. I mean, literally 3 times higher.
Is that toxins associated, or what would be driving that?
Yeah, we don't know. So one thing to point at is something called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease.
Sure.
So NAFLD is like almost ubiquitous now. We did a trial and we scanned like metabolically sort of somewhat healthy individuals because we wanted to look at metabolic optimization using a low-carb diet and using a continuous glucose monitor. And when we took all the metabolic biomarkers and we did the liver scans, it came back like we did high resolution. We didn't get it approved to do a CT scan because of radiation. So we did a high resolution ultrasound, and like 70% of the participants had like the early stages of non-alcoholic fatty. Yeah. And that got cut in half with like a low carb diet over like 12 weeks. So that's like, there's really no kind of, therapy for that except a low-carb diet. It's probably the most effective. We did a modified ketogenic diet. But I think like, where the rubber meets the road is that your metabolic health starting right now is what's going to prevent, cancer rates. Yeah. So that's like, and also pretty much, the 4 horsemen, right? So you have cancer, you have metabolic diseases like type 2 diabetes, you have Alzheimer's disease, and cardiovascular disease. So they're the 4 things that are essentially going to kill you. And metabolic health is the primary driver to delay the onset of the 4 horsemen that are going to kill you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's like, there's a suite of metabolic they use the term cardiometabolic biomarkers, but it should be cardio-neuro-immuno metabolic biomarkers because your immune system is tied to this too. And I think that the more data, the more blood work and, cardiometabolic biomarker measurements that you can get now, and then like every year, try to compete with yourself and try to improve those cardiometabolic biomarkers. Like I come here twice a year now to do a DEXA scan, and I try to beat my DEXA scan or try to maintain it as I'm, 50 years old and trying to, further reduce the, in a couple of months, I'll be 50. So really? So I'm trying to like, I'm competing with myself to at least maintain the same level of bone density and muscle and things like that. Yeah. So these are things I think people really need. And exercise too. Nobody talks about exercise, but exercise there's an emerging field of exercise oncology. It's like a huge lever for that. Your exercise, your muscle is like an endocrine organ and secretes, factors that have pretty profound anti-cancer effects. So dietary therapy coupled with exercise therapy, and that includes cardio. I hate doing it, but cardio and strength training, it's like a 1 + 1 = 3. So there's like a synergy between the two in regards to brain health, but also just tumor suppression, right? So,
this is going to sound like a really basic level question, but with obesity being so rampant, and clearly we're just overeating. We're just overeating processed foods. In your future pacing, like what's the solution?
Well, I call it energy toxicity, right? So energy toxicity, people are eating, and you probably experience this even as a bodybuilder when you're bulking up and you're consuming excess calories and you're in a caloric surplus. Like your levels of inflammation kind of go up. Like you feel achy, it's like your body's in a protracted state of inflammation that you probably intuitively know is not a good thing, but is like a means to the end, right? Which is like you have to, I remember when I was younger, I had to eat a lot to actually gain weight, and then the strength would come kind of after that. There would be like a delay. And right now I just focus like on strength, and I just don't, do like almost no hypertrophy work really, but I should. But just eating that amount of food, I just remember I felt so much better when I would just try to cut up for the summer. And that would typically mean just like cutting carbs, switching out the starches for vegetables, and just cutting sugar out. And it's like, wow, like my face would clear up, like everything would just get better, all my joints and everything.
Now, people are chasing dopamine.
Everybody is like experiencing that right now. The large majority.
Dopamine, ups and downs.
Yep.
So many people have just compulsions of eating. It's just like, they're done eating one meal, they're going to the next. It's just like, how do we eradicate or cure this epidemic?
Yeah, it's multifactorial. And I think it's going to need a strategy because everybody's relationship with food is a little bit different, and people go to food, different food sources for different reasons, right? I mean, some people just indulge in, people have different palates, and I know working with them, it's really important there's an inclusion and an exclusion criteria when you get people to go in a clinical trial. And some people are so carb addicted that you cannot convince them of this eating strategy.
Now, is that because their glucose is constantly running high and they're getting these ups and downs? Or is that just like a psychological dopamine thing? Is it probably both?
Yeah, I think it's multifactorial. I think that people do have a glucose addiction, and that, spiking of glucose, like as you said, releases dopamine. It releases a lot of feel-good hormones. It's also tightly linked to our early eating patterns in childhood, and then those patterns kind of set the stage for how we eat as an adult. And I think that those patterns are really hard to break. And it actually, there should be like an addiction
of Halloween for all American kids to be going out and getting pillowcases full of sugar.
Yep. So in the low-carb keto community, there's like a knee-jerk reaction to being very anti-GLP-1. But I actually think that a GLP-1 is a drug that can be used as a behavioral tool.
Sure.
So if you give someone, if dietary therapy doesn't work and you're coaching them and it's just not working, a GLP-1 coupled with a continuous glucose monitor, which may not even be needed, but these are two behavioral tools that will give the person feedback. Right. So the GLP-1 will basically, the person will experience the benefits of essentially caloric restriction and all the benefits that come along with that. And then the CGM will give them tight insight into what types of food and the amount of food, how that impacts their glycemic variability. And then they can couple that with how they feel. And then I think you have two tools that should be used simultaneously with the right coaching. And then also with people that go on GLP-1 drugs, if they couple it with exercise and a higher protein diet to mitigate the weight loss and the muscle loss that will likely come. I don't think there's any mechanism of GLP-1 induced muscle wasting. I think it just has to do with people just losing weight at an accelerated rate. and then gaining it back. Maybe there's something I miss. I mean, we teach about this in the medical school, and I don't think, to my knowledge, there's any specific information about GLP-1 induced muscle wasting. I think it's more just with
Dr. Bickman mentioned something about increased hyperplasia of fat cells.
Yeah.
I don't remember what he said, but there was something around like increased.
He did. He said that, and I was unaware of that. So I went to the primary literature, and in animal models, there's like these adipose stem cells that when a GLP-1 was given, and I don't think this has been replicated in humans. And there's 2 papers that I read after he said that, because I was unaware of that. And he actually said this at Metabolic Health Summit, which was, so I made a note and I looked up those papers, and I think those papers referenced, indeed, there was like adipose stem cells that then differentiated, and actually there was an increase in the number of adipocytes. So you had more adipocytes, but there were the type of adipose site, white adipose, that had like a lot of like flux. So there was like, it could store fat, but also had high rates of lipolytic enzymes to release fat. There were like healthy adipose tissue, and I don't think that that's necessarily like a bad thing. I think it's important to look at the outcome data in humans. And if we take adipose samples in humans, and actually the outcome data suggests that they have a reduction in fat, but then they can, and I think he made the comment that when people get off GLP-1s, they can, their adipose mass is decreasing, their muscle mass is decreasing, and when you get off of GLP-1s, you get proportionally greater expansion of the adipose tissue, which I think people wouldn't argue with that. So that's why it's really important to at least have an eating strategy, exercise strategy, and an off-ramp to GLP-1s if you do want to come off of them. And I know that I think there was laws just enacted that compound pharmacies can't mix up GLP-1s now. So that would make it really cheap. But I think the pharmaceutical started lobbying against that. And now I think you have to buy like the brand name GLP-1s. I could be wrong about that. And I think the laws are still going back and forth, but I knew many physicians that were just basically having them compounded, and they're getting them real cheap for the patients, but I think they're putting the, stop to that. But I think these drugs are amazing, and I think you can microdose them to achieve the desired outcome. And when you couple that with just, even, it doesn't have to be ketogenic diet, just mild, moderate carbohydrate restriction. The ketogenic diet is a big lever for doing that, but it's not, sustainable for most people. For the things we study, I think it's absolutely essential. But I think for the average person, microdosing GLP-1 with a high protein, lower carbohydrate mixed diet, high fiber, would be kind of the path to go, and couple that with exercise, because the exercise component is going to be important as you lose weight. But if you're obese and you drop 50 pounds, you're dropping muscle because you don't need as much muscle to carry the weight. So I think that needs to be acknowledged too. Like it'd be like really hard for someone who's 350 pounds to go to even like 220 pounds and not lose any skeletal muscle mass, because you're simply not carrying around, as much body mass. So you don't need as much.
One of the most interesting things you said last time, and I wonder where you've landed with this, is that you're actually implementing this therapy or this modality just as a preventative.
Yeah.
Like you're implementing this glucose to ketone ratio on a regular basis, and maybe suggesting other people should. And it's been a few years since we've spoken, so I'd love to have you bring up, like, what does that protocol look like for you personally now as a preventative for cancer?
Yeah. I think, this was talked about, like, it was just like an idea I had maybe like on a podcast in like 2009 or 10 or whatever. And maybe I said it again at Tim Ferriss's, and it got reverberated and put into a book, like kind of like a anti-cancer protocol that could be implemented. It could be so simple as just going on a fasting, like Walter Longo has the fasting mimicking diet, which is done for 5 days and 1 month using, like some powdered foods and things like that. So you could simply just eat like, go on a sardine fast or whatever. I kind of like popularized this like over 10 years ago that you could just like
take that whole
5 to 7 days. Yeah. Wild planet, right? So yeah, just do like 1 or 2 cans of sardines per day for like a week and do that, once every 2 months or something like that. And you take, sardines and might want to take MCT oil or ketone supplements, and you induce and maintain a glucose-ketone index, of like 1, if you could achieve that. And by all accounts from the literature that I look at, it's hard to measure autophagy, but you can measure something called the autophagosome, and there's different components to the autophagosome. My theory, just based on the basic science literature and what's out there, is that if you achieve and maintain a glucose-ketone index of like 1 for like 5 days to a week, that's going to trigger a massive change in your metabolic physiology that's going to impact everything from the senescent cells to stimulating autophagy, especially if you couple this with like not like lifting heavy weights, but moderate exercise, cardio, to further augment that transformation of like, reducing glycolysis to like nothing and just augmenting your fat burning capacity and elevating your ketones. I think that'll put a lot of pressure on cancer cells and precancerous cells, because we are all sort of like cancering.
Yeah.
So there's sort of different metabolic and oncogenic transformations and like our organs where cells get, hits. They get, DNA nicks and double-stranded nicks, and you get oncogenic transformation of cells that are not like cancerous yet, but they're precancerous. And then if we induce this deep metabolic physiological state that is basically a deep state of fasting, but it doesn't have to be necessarily fasting. That's why I like the idea of sardines and then ketones, that your body, if you were to take blood from someone, it would look like they're fasting from metabolic physiology standpoint. And if you look at the respiratory quotient, they're deep in ketosis. So I think just simply doing that and having some kind of schedule and picking a week that, works with your schedule to do it, but you don't have to be like, obsessive or militant about doing it. And, I've done that in the past, and the weeks that I do it, I am hyper productive. And in regards to like writing research grants or working on papers, I just I do it like if my wife's traveling or something like that, because I like to, have dinner with her, breakfast, and dinner with her pretty much every, it's kind of antisocial, but you could just fit it to your schedule.
The benefits wouldn't be received on a normal keto diet, but they would be achieved with sort of this protein-sparing modified fast with maybe some sardines and some other fats.
Or you could do just a calorie-restricted ketogenic diet of the foods that you like. I just liked sardines because something about when I was eating just like 2 or 3 cans a day, it was like 500 calories, and I would get my protein, and at the end of the week, I would transition back into lifting, and it was like so omega-3 fats have an anti-catabolic effect. They have an anti-inflammatory effect. And then the protein and then the micronutrient content pretty much prevents your body from being in any kind of deficiency state in regards to micronutrients at the end of the week too. So there's different reasons for that. And I think like in hindsight, like I was like, why did this work so good for me? It's like, I haven't done it in a while, but I think that you could maybe do the same thing with just, that's essentially what a fasting mimicking diet is. Right. But I don't want to use all the plant-based powders and formulas and stuff and soups with that kit that's sold at Walter Longo, but he has like data to back up, that I think the same thing can be achieved with like, what if you want to call it a carnivore approach, and just using, you could do organ meats, like liver is pretty good.
But 500 calories is sort of the upper limit.
I think so. For me, once I go above that, like my ketones will start to be lower, or like I think you'll get like an insulin response. But when I measured my insulin after that, it was like 1. It was like, it was deficient. It almost looked like I was type 1 diabetes. And at that level of insulin suppression, I feel that ramps up ketosis. That's like the fire that basically opens the floodgates for beta oxidation of fatty acids in the skeletal muscle and also in the liver. And when you augment fat oxidation in the liver, that contributes to ketogenesis. So you're getting like all the benefits, and then you're not like starving your body. I did notice, I did a couple fasts that was 3 days, and even after 7 days of eating nothing, Like I was strong right at the end, but then it just like hits you that following week. When you start working out, you're like, you just don't. It takes like a week or two to recover from a true 7-day fast for me, because my metabolism is pretty fast too, I think.
Yeah.
So I did not experience that with calorie restricted, modified fast, which could be, the Sardine seemed to be, or works good for me. So
got it. It's a funny story that I had never been in sardines. I heard you talk on Tim's podcast about sardines. I was like, I could get myself to do it if I was a bodybuilder, but but then I went to Portugal. Have you ever been to Portugal?
Oh yeah.
And that's just like a different level of sardines. And now I found like these imported Portuguese sardines, and you're like, this is a different experience.
Yeah. That's actually not a country. My wife has been to Lisbon, but that's not a country that I've actually been to. But I get sardines from Portugal. I think I was in Barcelona or Spain or all around there. But yeah, they have good.
That's just like pushed me over the edge, and now I'm like all about sardines.
Oh yeah, it's good.
So one of the things you said when you came in is that you're working on this resilience project with the military. Yeah. That's interesting to me. What does that look like on research perspective? What are you guys focused on?
Yeah. Well, the primary project, even from as a postdoc in 2004, actually over 10 years now, or 20 years, I've been working on this. It's crazy, but developing, sort of understanding what's called oxygen toxicity seizures. So Navy SEALs will use a closed circuit rebreather. So it's understanding that. And then through those studies, we found out that metabolic, preserving brain energy metabolism and reducing oxidative stress is like the lever you have to pull to prevent these oxygen toxicity seizures. And looking at all these different mitigation strategies, ketosis was by far way more effective than anti-seizure drugs. So I kind of settled on that in like 2008-ish or 9, and then we got a couple big grants to study that, 2009. So I put a lot of time and effort to developing ketogenic strategies for preventing, increasing the safety, performance, and resilience for oxygen toxicity, but sort of moving it to other extreme scenarios. And that could be kind of working with, hypoxia, hyperoxia would be the undersea environment. Hypoxia would be at altitude, but also, doing a lot of workshops and kind of various projects with NASA too in extreme environments. So I was on NASA's extreme environment mission operations, lived underwater for 10 days and kind of did some work on myself. And now my wife was on the mission after that, where we collected data. So we're working with different groups where it's, not saying like every astronaut or every warfighter should be ketogenic, but there are certain environmental scenarios where you have extreme environments where being in a state of therapeutic ketosis is more effective than anything that we know of in regard to increasing the safety in that environment, protecting the brain, the neuroprotective effects, the anti-seizure effects, and also just preventing the brain from being sort of crippled by that extreme environment in regards to low oxygen availability, or conversely, even hyperoxia, which is a closed circuit rebreather. So we're doing work. We did a lot of preclinical animal model work, and now we have some studies that, as a co-investigator, I'm working with Duke University because they have these amazing chambers. They can put a surrogate to like the seal in the chamber where they're exercising. They're on a simulator. So you're assessing like the reaction time, decision-making. They have a line going into their vein, going through the wall of the chamber, looking at like blood gases, doing like, going to a mass spec, like looking at, all the different parameters. Cool. So essentially we kind of look at these subjects, in the absence and presence of therapeutic ketosis. So they'll come in following their standard diet, put them in the chamber. We're measuring EEG, EKG. We're measuring all these different parameters. And then basically we push them to what's called an EEG seizure. So they're not having a severe tonic-clonic seizure, but we can pick up EEG activity as a precursor immediately before an impending seizure. And then we stop the protocol. We switch off the oxygen in the mask and just go to air. They're still at pressure, and then we decompress. So then we look at what's called the latency to seizure, and we do that before ketosis and after ketosis. So we're developing different, ketogenic diets and then ketone supplementation to as sort of a countermeasure in that extreme
push their ability to be resilient to that situation.
Yep.
Incredible.
So I think there's a lot of applications there. I mean, beyond oxygen toxicity, right? It could just be like many extreme austere environments. When your body is adapted to, transitioning in and out of ketosis, then if you're in more austere environments, you could everything from sleep deprivation to heat stress to actually hypovolemia shock. We're doing setting up to do some shock models and things like that. So I think across the board, there's a lot of physiological stressors that could be in part mitigated or attenuated by being in a state of being adapted to ketosis or giving ketone supplementation.
How does one help me operationalize ketosis, right? Yeah. So you're obviously I'm guessing in and out of the state a lot. Mm-hmm. And I heard you recently speak about fresh vegetables versus cooked vegetables is going to do something different in ketosis. Mm-hmm. So if we wanted to sort of break this down to the listener and say here's how you can operationalize it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah. You're almost always in some version or coming in and out of some version of ketosis.
I am now, because I'm wearing a continuous ketone monitor, so I'm always testing different formulas that we want to move the science into research. So I'm doing that. But I think more broadly speaking, I think ketosis. Well, I think never going into the state of ketosis is unnatural. So I think everybody should do it from time to time, and you could do it through intermittent fasting, carbohydrate restriction, strict ketogenic diet, or ketone supplementation. So we have a lot of different ways to achieve and maintain that. But what I think people just taking a step back, we should really just focus on the neuro, cardio, immuno, metabolic biomarkers. So looking at those, looking at your triglycerides, your hemoglobin A1C, your blood pressure. Nobody talks about blood pressure. These are the things that we need to dial in. And you could do that. You could quickly do that with a low-carb diet. But that's not for everyone. But I think the diet is the biggest lever, and then exercise too, of course. So I think that is the most important thing, and that almost always involves some form of carbohydrate restriction. So if we look at military nutrition, and I just kind of wrote up a sort of an article on this, if you go to the mess halls or the dining facilities, the DFOCs, they call them in the military, it's mostly processed carbohydrates. The MREs are only 13% protein. So on average, and they all have over 50% carbs. And so there's some higher protein ones that are almost 20%, but they range from 8% protein to 15. So the average is 13% protein for the MREs. So we have a military health crisis right now, if we're talking about the military, the general population, because 77% of the people recruited are unfit to serve right now. And that's primarily due to obesity, and there's some academic things. So they actually created programs that are pre-programs for people that want to get into the military that help them lose weight. So in the military, they prioritize and really encourage, it becomes part of the military culture, exercise. So physical activity is part of, they have a very structured physical activity regimen, but that they have not prioritized that for nutrition. So they use physical activity as the primary weight loss tool for people coming into the military that are unfit to serve, that are overweight or obese. So I think my sort of, and this is the general population, is that, nutrition is the biggest lever. And also we need to assess their cardiometabolic health biomarkers, because we have to think about, their general health, because it's actually a national security issue. Sure. There's a national security issue. And then I served on different government panels like DOD's Congressionally Directed Medical Research Program, where a lot of the proposals was strategies to help the recruits, to lose weight. My area was really metabolic optimization to make them for performance enhancement. But I think the biggest thing to focus on was really just the general body military. Weight. Yeah, it's just the body weight.
So how do you personally operationalize that? So give me an idea of what that looks like. Because, what comes to mind is people are like, well, what do you snack on? Or how often do I eat? Do I eat 3 meals a day or 1 meal a day or 2 meals a day? Do I eat like a pound of protein for breakfast? Or there's so many different directions. I'm like, how do you personally just like, hey, here's what my day looks like?
Well, I think it's going to be different for everybody, but I think I'm not a huge fan of macronutrient counting, but I think it's really important to do that, at least to do, I mean, for research, we do something called a food frequency questionnaire, and that's often criticized, but the NIH has like a pretty good one. And then you could do a 24-hour like food recall for someone to get an assessment. So I think the general person like should do that and have some form of metabolic awareness. They should, get a $10 glucometer and just measure your fasting glucose and then measure your glucose after, the breakfast you eat every day. And if it pops up to like 160 or 170, you got to change your breakfast, right? So I think it's important to be proactive and get ahead of the problem before it becomes a problem, and just understand what the food and the meals that you're currently eating are doing to your metabolic physiology. I think that's like super important to do. And operationalizing, ketogenic diets, or just, let's call it carbohydrate restriction, just, if you just want to just count carbs and you're at, you want to lose weight, you want to change your body composition, you want to improve your performance, and you're eating 300-400 grams of carbs a day, which is like the RDA recommendation. If you dial that back down to 200, for someone like my size, for like a 6 foot, over 200-pound person, it would be some. For me, I think it was 360 grams of carbs a day, or 370 or something like that, according to like the eating. So just dial that back down, and then do restrict your carbohydrates until you're and fill that in with protein. So the protein leveraging hypothesis too is going to sort of have a satiating effect. It's going to control your appetite. So it's kind of really that simple for most people. But you have to meet people from where they're at, right? And every strategy is going to be a little bit different.
Sure.
So
a lot of people listening are going to be, they're already doing all the basics, right? They're usually high performers. These guys are already doing what they need to do. But it's like, well, should I be fasting? Should I be eating breakfast? Should I be eating 3 meals a day? Yeah. Should I be eating 1 meal a day? And how do we operationalize that over time, right? Because like sometimes it's great, I'm gonna do 7 days of fasting this month, and then like, do I, do some time restricted feeding until noon and eat in a 6-hour window, or like that's sort of the questions that you just get endless confusion around. So obviously people come to high performance coaches and like, hey, let's operationalize this for you based on what you're trying to accomplish, your daily routine, your objectives and goals. But broad stroke, are there any sort of, you give some really general things about like reduce your carbs, replace your protein. Are there any general rules or applications that you implement in your life that have helped you be more successful?
Yeah, I think intermittent fasting is great for people. Like I did that a lot, and I would do that a lot and be very productive in the morning. But the more I did it, the more weight I started to lose.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
Like you may remember me back like 2000, I don't know, when we were at the Powerhouse, gym, it was like 235, 240. I would like cruise it. And then now I actually started getting into the ketogenic stuff and then taking the 1 meal per day at the end of the day to extremes. I was intermittent fasting every day. I do extended fast. It was very ketogenic. And my DEXA scans over the course of 2010, or I think the first one is 2008. Anyway, from 2008 to 18, because I took a year off at 18, just did body weight. I think I lost 18 pounds of lean body mass over that.
10 years.
Over 10 years,
Wow.
18 pounds of lean body mass. And I was like, whoa, I got to get ahead of this, right? So, and at that time, I think I'd taken some time off. I was really push-ups, chin-ups, stuff like that. But I needed to get in, for my body, I need to get 3 meals per day to spread out the protein to actually restore the lean body mass that I lost, and to build that back up with strength training, and then come up with a maintenance program where I can maintain a certain level of strength that for me, I just, I think, I have certain goals for deadlift, squats, bench, things like that I want to maintain. And I had to work back up to that. And the only way to maintain that for me, and I've tried many different approaches, is to get at least 3 meals per day. And that included introducing breakfast back in, but maybe like twice a week. If I have like early classes or something, I just delay it till like noon or something like that. But for people who have, who are obese and want to lose weight, like time-restricted feeding or intermittent fasting is a great way to create a caloric deficit, and that works for them. And some people just don't want to eat breakfast. So if they want to do that, I encourage like people to do that. But if they're trying to gain muscle and build muscle, I think if you do that excessively, it's going to be hard to build and maintain muscle if that's like the track.
Yeah.
Maybe that's your experience too.
Around 1 gram per pound? Are you consistently over that? So much protein?
Yeah, I do about 1 gram per pound is pretty consistent with, And maybe I did less than that for maybe almost a decade and just heavily more towards fat. But now I've titrated protein back in, and then just based upon a lot of blood work, a lot of biomarkers and DEXA scans, I just kind of figured out what works for me. I basically keep really detailed notes on everything. Like every weightlifting session I've ever had since 1991, I've written into a journal. So so every session. Yeah. So.
And for the listener, we've talked about this in the past, like
I'm not obsessive about it. And my workouts are like maybe.
Well, you're also not human. Your like, strength is remarkable.
An hour or 2 hours per week, really. But it's kind of like the Dorian Yates approach. Like I warm up and do a couple sets, like 3 different exercises, and just in and out of the gym. And I was like that, back years ago too, but not now. I just take it. I kind of really, I'm very minimalist, I guess you would say, with the strength training.
The last podcast we did, I told this story of the first time I saw you across the gym. I kind of tilted my head and I was like, "Who's that guy?" I was doing something heavy and I looked over when you were doing 4-plate bent rows and I was like, I knew you did that. Yeah, you mentioned that you had been fasting for 3 days or something. I was like, "What? Who are you?"
I remember when I saw you first time, 2009, I think at the Tampa Pro. It was like one of the, I'd moved down here a few years before that. And you were walking, I think maybe you were covered up, but I could see your legs. And all I saw was like, I had never even seen you before. I was like, who is this person? I was like, is this like Tom Platz times 2?
My gosh.
I don't know, whatever it was just like, I was with, I don't know if you remember Ronald Coleman. He was an IFBB pro, but he was a natural. He won the Team Universe. Right. He was the first Team Universe when they skipped the core. I was with him and we were just kind of like in awe. And I forget, what did you placed high on? That was like your first
ever pro shape.
Oh, and you got third. Yeah. I know you like killed it. Yeah. You were like everybody, like, I don't even remember who the first place was, but everybody was talking about you because you had just come out of like.
Thank you. Yeah. It's kind of a surprise. Nobody's expecting that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So that was your first pro show.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 2009. Awesome. And coming out of Canada, like not knowing anything about how it would place, and it was Dennis James that won the show. And
was it 2009?
2009.
Yeah. Okay.
Dennis James.
Oh, Dennis James. See, I don't even remember that. I just remember you.
Yeah. He was like my, a guy that I looked up to as a kid. Right?
Yeah.
So to be able to stand on stage with him was, and compete was, great.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I have for you is like, for someone who's been on a ketogenic diet as long as you have, what's your stance on cholesterol? What does your blood work look like? Do you have any consideration around like, Peter's obviously very, very adamant about getting the ApoB down. Obviously you're very metabolically healthy, but with such elevated fat intake, do you ever see any fluctuations or concern around cholesterol?
Oh yeah. Yeah. And so actually I should probably add, one reason I cut back on over 300 grams of fat a day or 350 grams of fat a day, I was actually taking in like 10 years ago, is that I did, my LDL did skyrocket. And some other things started to change too. My triglycerides start to creep up a little bit. They were already like super low, like 40s, but then they creep up to like 60s or 70s, which for me, I thought was kind of high. I like to keep them like 50 or below. So what I've done over the last 2 years now, just going on 2 years, is I did a genetic test, and I think this is important for some people, and discovered that I am a hyperabsorber of cholesterol. So I did GB Health Watch, and it indicated that I had a mutation in the Niemann-Pick C1-like 1 receptor, or LPC1L1 receptor. And that is, it's actually a transporter for cholesterol in the gut, but also in the liver. It plays a role. So right now I take, I get about 200 grams of fat a day, like, 200 grams of protein, and then kind of just get high fiber carbs. I've added ezetimibe, sold as Zetia, And that's typically like 10 milligrams per day, but I break it in half and I take 5 milligrams per day. And that has dropped. My LDL cholesterol was in the low 300s. My ApoB was, I kept an eye on that. That was got highest about 165. So, and they were the levels that when I started ezetimibe, and then I added ezetimibe, and now my LDL is about 190-ish, and then my ApoB is about 80 right now.
From 5
just
milligrams.
Ezetimibe monotherapy.
And is that because of, you think, your specific genetic predisposition? Or do you think that molecule would do the same thing for anyone else with the same numbers of you?
Good question. So I think I've been in communication with people that are kind of in the category of lean mass hyperresponders, meaning that, they have very low triglycerides, very high HDL, and then astronomical like LDL, right? And several of these people, they take ezetimibe monotherapy, typically 10 milligrams per day, and they've really reduced their ApoB and their LDL down.
Is it cholesterol absorption inhibitor? Is that what it is?
Yeah. So it inhibits cholesterol at the level of like the gastrointestinal mucosa, but I think it also plays a role in cholesterol in the liver in some, that's less clear from the literature, but it is very clear that, the mutation I have makes me, apparently it's like a gain of function mutation where I transport more, I'm a hyperabsorber of cholesterol with this. And there's like about a half dozen.
Absorption dietarily.
Dietarily.
So most people don't absorb a lot of cholesterol dietarily, right?
Or you auto-regulate your liver. If you absorb it, your liver is very good at auto-regulating the amount that you need, right? So through cholesterol synthesis. Yeah. So that's right. And so ezetimibe is a very elegant solution to a problem that I'm not 100% sure that it's a problem. So that's elevated LDL and ApoB in the context of otherwise very good metabolic biomarkers. My blood pressure's low, my triglycerides are low, hemoglobin A1C is like 3.9, like everything's pretty low. My glycemic variability is very low too. It stays, between 70 and like 110. So everything is kind of dialed in, but it had this astronomically high LDL, but I also have my LP little a is quite high. And then I also have like a little bit of a family history of some cardiovascular issues, but not too bad, but maybe some strokes and like AFib and some other things like in the cardiovascular realm. So I thought I'm just being proactive and a little bit just cautionary and just bringing my LDL and ApoB level down to a level that's maybe high normal, but not astronomically off the charts. Because I do think having that high particle count and just having, there's, ApoB is causative. And I think there's good data for that in the general population. It's less clear if that applies to someone with metabolic biomarkers that are consistent with a lean mass hyperresponder.
You're not normal. Yeah. It's
And it's probably like, the hazard ratio is probably like so low compared to like blood pressure, compared to like other things. So, but it's just like, and if I was to take ezetimibe and I could see my numbers going down, or I felt achy or brain fog or something like that, as things that happen with statins, especially lipophilic statins, when you take a statin, like, your listeners probably know, ubiquitously, you're decreasing cholesterol synthesis at the level of the tissue. Not this you're circulating cholesterol, but you're decreasing cholesterol synthesis in the brain. And cholesterol is a primary component of something called myelin. And myelin sort of coats the axons and actually is intimately associated with the speed of neuronal connections. So, and a statin you can do scans and take brains out of people that were on statins and their myelin is lower. It's a very powerful, drug that can decrease myelin. And people that take statins, especially lipophilic statins, they have brain fog. They don't know what that means, but even the cardiologist will agree that happens. Some people have amnesia. Some people, it can also create insulin resistance, and your blood sugar can start to creep up too. Yeah. These are unacceptable things for me. And I think that's, that is why I would steer people away from a statin and maybe trying ezetimibe, see how that works. And then, but if you have a family history, if you've had like an incident of, heart attacks, if you've had one or two, if you're eating like the standard American diet and you fit that mold, then statins, actually the outcome data is pretty solid that you should be on it. Like, like someone like my parents, for example, I think they're taking like a small dose. We talked them off the ledge of like the high dose. And I think my mom got completely off, but my dad takes like a small dose just because, maybe a little bit of family history on that side. And I don't object to that. So.
And that's not really your expertise, but how about PCSK9 inhibitors? Any thoughts or opinions?
Yeah, I think that's potentially a really great class of drug for the general population, that has, I think they're best for people with poor metabolic health, which is the large majority of the US population. And I think they are sort of like the next level up of cardioprotective drugs. And I think I'm not on it, but I know quite a few people that are on them and the data seems pretty solid with them.
Would someone who's, listening and maybe doesn't have the best metabolic health, considering going into this low carbohydrate diet, would it be advisable for them to start considering moving in the direction of ketosis, or they have to heal their body first? Like, do I have to heal the fatty liver? Do I have to heal my insulin resistance before going into something like ketosis? Because we know that ketosis is likely to drive cholesterol up. Or is it just like, overall, we want a low calorie diet to start before we start using the benefits of these ketogenic?
Well, there's a subset of people that follow ketogenic diets where their LDL goes up. And I used to think that was like 20%, but I think it's more like 50%. That, especially the saturated fat is really high. But I just think like simple carbohydrate restriction. So meeting people where they're at, if they get 200-300 grams of carbs, switching out, just cutting out like, excess sugar, added sugar, definitely. And then starches, like cutting out the potatoes, the rice, the bread, and then just starting there and then switching it out for vegetables, would be like kind of the first major lever you can pull. And then you don't have to get a CT scan, but there's new high resolution ultrasounds now. And I would advise people to get, a liver function or liver scan for that, especially if like their liver enzymes are creeping up, their ALT are elevated. You want to kind of get on top of that before, because once it gets too far and you get that fibrosis, it's hard to reverse. The liver is pretty regenerative, but still like you can do some damage if you let that, if you don't reverse that. Try. But yeah, I think your question is like, a ketogenic diet is a rather extreme diet. And I think you don't have to go into that. Like I'm actually gravitating myself towards a low-carb Mediterranean style diet, if you want to call it that, where, I'm not carnivore, I'm like carnivore and vegan, right? So like it's usually
50.
Yeah, I'm omnivore and I do embrace, eating vegetables. Like I have berries every day. I have usually like a small apple every day and broccoli every day and dark chocolate pretty much every day. Like I have those carbs, but that pretty much makes up like 90% of the carbs that I eat, what I just described. So my carb sources are kind of limited. And sometimes I'll have like a lot of broccoli, but I'll put like some cheddar cheese on it. I tend to have like a lot of berries and that could make about 100 grams of carbs per day, but about a third of that is fiber. So one rule that I have with carbohydrates is that it should be more than 20 to like 30% fiber. So whatever carbohydrate source you're consuming, and like broccoli, I think is about a third fiber or something like that, or asparagus or something like that. If it's about a quarter to a third fiber, that's usually going to be a beneficial carbohydrate for you. And it's also gonna have like, soluble fiber too is really good too, because it's good for your microbiome, but creates a short chain fatty acids like butyrate that's beneficial. So
how much is modern science and all this research involved with actually considering individual genetics?
Yeah, I think genetics are kind of like the next frontier. And I think the next frontier is going to be like an AI platform with predictive analytics that incorporates like digital where you twin. Upload your digital twin, like your 23andMe data. Looks like they're in a lot of hot water right now. But like, your genetic data, your biomarker data, your diet, your wearable data will go into this app. It'll integrate all that and give you actionable advice, but also have predictive analytics that can even direct you towards or against various pharmacotherapies that you could use to optimize those metabolic biomarkers that it's measuring. And, I'm in touch with different like groups of people that are working on this. And that's part, and at USF, I'm part of a group called Precision Medicine and Precision Nutrition. But we use like, multi-omics, like, metabolomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, all multi-omics to look at different things, whether it be like looking at the tumor itself or the person's metabolism and then optimizing that for therapy or just preventative strategies. But I do think that is kind of the future. I think having like this multi-component thing and then AI analytics, that have algorithms that can give you actionable advice, because people are just get overwhelmed with all the information from their wearables. Right. Where I think the next, with AI is so powerful. I've been using the deep research option on Chat GPT. It's expensive, but for writing, different, for jumping into really deep subjects. And I can just see that being the future. Like, where,
we can just upload everything into, is it notebook.lm? Have you tried that one yet?
No, but you could upload a PDF and it'll give you a beautiful 20-minute podcast on like the last research paper. And it's almost like,
it's simplifying everything. It's almost eliminating the need for humans. And you're like, where do we fit into this? Like, how do we, because we're going to have to play with it. Like, well, how do we stay on top of it? And education is being commoditized. It's interesting, isn't it? It's
I feel like I'm going to be replaced. I feel like, my students could almost, what I have to do is actually put my lectures through this AI system to correct it and refine it and actually make it, probably from my standpoint, make it more engaging to the student.
Sharpen your thinking, for sure. It's like, I put things in there all the time and I'm like, I never thought of that. That's a great angle. That's a great approach. And you're like, certainly making you better. But what I recognize is you're in the 1% of the 1%. And like 95 or 8% of people aren't using this at all. So like the fact that you're engaging with it, you're like, it's almost creating more of a separation, I think.
It is.
It's
scary.
Ray Dalio said 3% of the population is going to do everything, and 97% is going to be left sort of in the wake. And that's an interesting and frightening thought all at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, using that, you also need to you need to learn to ask the right questions, right? I mean, right before coming here, I had, meetings with Moffitt Cancer Center, and I put in a very specific question. I was like, would ketone metabolic therapy work with adult lung cancer patients using checkpoint inhibitors? And it gave me like a 10-page thing with all the published preclinical animal model data and human data on ketone metabolic therapy, which is like most oncologists have never heard of that, and a specific class of checkpoint inhibitors called PD in adult lung cancer. Like it scanned it. It took about 16 minutes for it to do a deep research, but it gave me a beautiful article on that with no less than maybe 40 or 50 publications on a topic that most oncologists, even lung cancer oncologists, would think there would be any data on that.
That's a PhD dissertation in 60 minutes, right? Okay, you just wrote my PhD. I can read this in 2 hours.
And seriously, it would have took me 3 or 4 days to actually be on like PubMed and all the different, databases to really find that article and to put it and synthesize it in the way that it spit out. So it was kind of scary. Like I'm going to be replaced.
Yeah, but scary and really empowering, because
it is empowering.
I don't think there's an end, right? So I think as long as you take the mindset of, well, there's no, like, great, we solved that problem. Then there's another problem. Then there's another problem. It allows the depth of research to be accelerated rather than like, oh no, I'm going to be replaced. It's like, no, we're just going to have to keep up and go just as fast and if not deeper, which is really fascinating.
And it makes me think of everything that I should be like. I almost feel like I could just stay up all night, like, learning things that I didn't even know exist.
Well, I think we're probably not far away
from
instant downloads, right?
Yeah.
Like you just took 3 days of research and did it in 16 minutes. So now how do we condense that even further?
Yeah.
I think we have to be
having our phone, like Neuralink, like having, a computer tied to our brain where it's like a cognitive orthotic, right? So it's like we can think about something and be able to access that information or bits of that information and be able to conceptualize it and verbalize it. And I think that's kind of like the new man, right? It's like there's different paradigms where philosophers have talked about the new man, even C.S. Lewis in his book, A Mere Christianity, I think the last chapter is the new man, sort of a spiritual awakening. And I feel like that's almost tied to like AI and almost AI like vetting out our own philosophy and even like ethics and things like that. I think that's like another frontier.
I love that you brought up spirituality because I know you are also a spiritual man. So how do you integrate this unbelievably rapid pursuit of technology and science with still being connected to the humanness of it all?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think science is like the pursuit of truth through, limited means, right? And our ability to sort of understand it. We have like a toolbox that's very unique and it's in like the physical realm, whereas the metaphysical realm would be like spirituality. It's things that we can't, physically touch. But I do think that science, the trajectory of science right now, and especially with AI, is going to help bridge the gap between scientific understanding and philosophy and spiritual understanding. And I do think that the rate that we're going now, I think it's only going to make spirituality like even a stronger component and sort of factor in human life, and it's going to enhance its importance. Yeah, I think.
Are you looking at healing and performance, whether it be in cancer or these epilepsy people? Are you looking at biophysics at all? Are you looking at any of the vibrational frequencies? Are you looking at that as far as enhancing or affecting the healing?
I think tied to that, we're looking at, there's an emerging field of metabolic psychiatry too, that's intimately linked to our metabolism. And then within that realm is just general brain health. And I think, and just like, being centered, and that could be all these lifestyle things. Like the ketone metabolic therapy review article talked about meditation, talked about I personally believe in grounding. The first thing I do is to wake up into the dewy lawn and get sun. And these are all things that are like woo-woo science that are not talked about. But I think maybe it's approaching that topic that you brought up, where it's like, aligning with a resonant frequency, if you want to.
Well, so going as far though as saying like the actual vibration, the actual not the woo side of the spiritual, but the little biophysics vibration of, because there's a lot of people now speaking of the inclusion of frequency-based therapies in healing. So the negative charge of a cell, the Gerald Pollack type stuff. Mm-hmm. I'd be curious if anyone's looking at that as far as including that in. I had someone on the podcast, I think it was Gerald Pollack, actually specifically talking about, a healthy cell vibrates at negative 20 millivolts or has this charge of negative 20 millivolts, and we have to maintain that charge. If you start to lose the negative charge, we move away from healthy, optimal functioning and move toward cancerous cells. Mm-hmm. Are you guys looking at that at all when it comes to cancer therapies?
With cancer? Not so much. I mean, I'm actually, my PhD training is patch clamp electrophysiology, where I measure what you're talking about. It's called the membrane potential of neurons. So a membrane potential of neuron would be like negative 60 millivolts. Right. And then you have like things like voltage gated sodium channels or potassium channels and then, the ATP synthase, ATP energy is actually what creates that differential of the electrons across that bilipid membrane, which is very thick. It's like 5 nanometers. And that creates, so your neurons and your cells, and even your cancer cells, are like little batteries. So neurons and cardiac myocytes are a little bit different because they're excitable and they fire action potentials, and that's how they communicate. But yeah, like every cell has is like a little battery, and it has this membrane potential that is intimately linked to its function. And that can be altered by so many different things, right? So, but it's tightly coupled to our energy. And we can derive energy from food, from the sun, and from various, there's different chemicals that we could take too that alter the energetic capacity of cells. Mitochondrial uncoupling agents can start to dissipate that energy, and there's different things. So, it's an area of science, I think, if what I'm getting at from what you brought up is kind of hard to study from like creating a hypothesis and then testing it and then, what's the outcome. So if I'm trying to get a better sense of what you're talking about, like what would be the objective biomarker or outcome that I would measure with what you're talking about?
So I don't know. I don't think about it. But I remember Dr. Pollock just referencing the requirement and necessity of the structured water, this exclusion zone water, to maintain that electrical potential within the cell. Yeah, but if the cell loses that charge, then it starts to move away from its optimal function. And so, he mentioned some correlation with cancer as cells start to lose this electrical potential.
Yeah, and as cells as cancer cells or even brain cancer cells, any kind of cell starts to become de-energized, the mitochondria senses an energetic crisis, and then that through something called the retrograde response, the mitochondria can, which really sets the voltage charge, communicates with the nucleus of the cell. That's called a retrograde response. And then that can actually kick on gene expression. So it could activate oncogenes. It could activate tumor suppressor genes. So if cells are in an energetic crisis, this retrograde response can trigger, can tell the nucleus that it is in an energetic crisis, and then it kicks on various cascades that could be, could cause cancer, for example. So that's all under sort of the umbrella of the metabolic theory of cancer, and then it's well supported by the scientific literature. But many different things can impair that, like our stress levels, our sun levels, different environmental toxins can impact so many different variables there. But
the last time you were here, you mentioned yourself and your wife had started a keto company, a ketone salt company. How's that going?
Yeah, good. So she's she's more the entrepreneur, and I'm not even part of that company technically, on paper, but I use the product, and actually the formulations that we developed, tested, and published on and have various patents on with the university, that is the molecule that she has. It's audacious nutrition, so audacious, and the product that I use every day is called Keto Start, and it has two forms of beta-hydroxybutyrate, the D and the L enantiomer. And then the formulation has basically sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium. So it's kind of like an electrolyte supplement, similar to Element or something like that, but the electrolytes are bound to these two ketones, forms of ketones. And so you can consume it, you achieve and maintain ketosis, and then it has, a lot of functional properties. Not only ketones can, energize the cells, augment ATP production, but they have anti-inflammatory effects, they have neuroprotective effects, they have epigenetic effects. So there's so many benefits. So I see ketone, specifically beta-hydroxybutyrate, is kind of, it was sort of like the new kid on the block maybe 5 to 10 years ago, but I think as creatine monohydrate came out in 1992, it took 5 to 10 years for the science to support it. So I was in exercise physiology in the early to mid 1990s, and I wrote my final exam paper on ergogenic age, and I described creatine as an ergogenic aid, and I got no points for it because the science was not there yet. And that was 1994 or 5. So I want to go back to that professor and say, but it was water, electrolytes. So it was shoes or something, ergogenic aids was the right answer or whatever. But but I do think looking fast forwarding, I think that ketones will be a viable ergogenic aid in the world of sports performance. But I think the dosage, the type of ketone, the dosage, the timing, the scheduling. So right now people are ingesting them and then basically looking at the acute response. So much like caffeine's done that way, but anabolic steroids are sort of something that you take as a training aid. So I think ketone supplements as a training aid. It's something that you take over a protracted period of time to enhance the adaptive response to exercise. So, augmenting, like reducing inflammation, which could, prevent your ability to recover from an exercise, like things like that. And it's not really being studied like that yet. And I've always advocated for that. Although we use exogenous ketones, given just prior to oxygen toxicity, and it works remarkably in that way. But I think in regards to, sports performance or as a lifestyle supplement, it should be used sort of every day, and over a period of time, you'll see the benefits.
If I recall correctly, you aren't a fan of oxaloacetate as a supplement?
Oxaloacetate? No, I think it has some some interesting effects.
As a different type of ketone, it still has some interesting benefits.
And alpha ketoglutarate too. Alpha ketoglutarate is actually, there's like a Nature paper showing that it has impacts longevity. Right. There's a Nature paper showing that it augments, a cancer therapy, the checkpoint inhibitors. So alpha ketoglutarate is also a component of something called the Deanna protocol. And Deanna is there's a foundation called the Winning the Fight Against Neurological Disease Foundation based here in Tampa, and I connected with them in 2010. Deanna was stricken with ALS, and her dad, a retired orthopedic surgeon, one of the most famous surgeons like in the Tampa area, he discovered by giving his daughter alpha ketoglutarate, GABA, CoQ10, and also MCT oil that comprises the Deanna protocol. It stopped the disease process, and Deanna is still alive today. She's doing well. She's stabilized, and the doctors gave her like 3 years to live back in like 2008 or 9. And we just had a fundraiser for her. So she has been, the original Deanna protocol was sort of, obviously named after her. And we've published like 3 papers on that. And if you go on, there's a website called Patients Like Me. And it's the oldest, most comprehensive patient database on neurological diseases and different drugs and different therapies. If you compare the Deanna protocol to the standard of care for ALS, and there's a 3 times greater response in regard to that compared to
natural supplements.
Compared to Riluzole, which is one of the drugs, has side effects, and there's another drug there. So like the patient, according to that, and it's those patients are actually pretty critical of the things too. So Patients Like Me, if you go to Deanna protocol, we're writing a sort of a case series study on the Deanna protocol now. So that's alpha ketoglutarate, and I bring that up. But alpha ketoglutarate, I use it as, it's arginine alpha ketoglutarate, so it boosts nitric oxide, and then the alpha ketoglutarate is part of the TCA cycle. So it can, so I take alpha ketoglutarate, creatine, and ketones sort of twice a day, and the second dose would be pre-workout.
It's very cool. Do you have a good source on that? I've been looking for a source on alpha ketoglutarate, and it's hard to find, just like Amazon, or do you have a good company that recommend?
Yeah, actually, Nutricost has an arginine alpha ketoglutarate that's pretty good, and there's a magnesium alpha ketoglutarate, but the magnesium may limit. There's a calcium alpha ketoglutarate too that you might want to take, but because I take the sodium, because I take an electrolyte beta hydroxybutyrate, I gravitate towards the arginine alpha ketoglutarate, and that arginine can also, be a precursor to nitric oxide. So it could help boost nitric oxide.
Can you tell the audience where to get Audacious Subs?
Yeah,
the URL?
Thanks for asking. Yeah. So Audacious Nutrition, just go to the website. If you just Google audaciousnutrition.com, there's Keto Start Plus that has caffeine, I think 100 milligrams per serving. And then there's the Silver Box, which is non-caffeine. So there's a Keto Spike tea, a Keto Spike coffee, and now a Keto Spike cocoa powder with basically cocoa bioflavonoids, like a real high concentration of that. So I take that. So it just tastes like cocoa, but you're getting like a dose of ketones. So you can, for people who very few people can achieve and maintain ketosis on a ketogenic diet. So, and that actually includes me, because I get enough carbohydrates from fruit and basically vegetables to keep my ketones pretty low, but usually about 0.5, but I keep it at 1 to 1.5 throughout the day with ketone supplementation that tastes really good. So that's the other thing. The other ketone supplements that are on the market that people gravitate towards are essentially like 1,3-butanediol or 1,3-butanediol based ketone esters. So that could be 1,3-butanediol, beta-hydroxybutyrate monoester. We actually have the diester. That actually has really interesting effects. So we're using that in a clinical trial. They all taste really bad, but your liver has to metabolize 1,3-butanediol through an alcohol dehydrogenase pathway. It creates like an aldehyde that's kind of like not...
That's the ingredient you was talking about.
Yeah. So 1,3-butanediol, I think it's okay to use occasionally to get a buzz and it will boost your ketones. But if you, for example, if you take enough 1,3-butanediol, and that's basically represents a big share of the ketone supplements that are on the market, if you take that at a dose to elevate your ketones an additional 2 millimolar every day for 2 weeks and then measure your liver enzymes, they're going to be significantly elevated based, it's going to be, you're going to see an elevation because it is an alcohol, it's a dialcohol technically, and it needs to be processed by the liver. So whereas a ketone salt is basically straight up ketones and it dissociates the electrolyte and then the ketones can just go right to
that was the ingredient. Because the last time I heard you mentioned that, and there's a specific company that's trying to sponsor the podcast, and I was like, you told me about this, and I was like, I gotta check in on this. It was the 1,3-butanediol.
Yeah. So people like pitch the 1,3-butanediol as a ketone ester, and now they're like a ketone precursor. And I have to say that we've used 1,3-butanediol in our cancer studies, our animal studies, and it does suppress cancer growth. So I think there are some applications to 1,3-butanediol, and it is a component to one of our ketone esters that we're using in our clinical trial, although we can add 2 ketones to the molecule, so we don't have to use as much like 1,3-butanediol.
Got it.
So there's some therapeutic benefits, but I kind of put that molecule in the realm of like, almost like a medicine. It doesn't taste good. I think it has therapeutic applications, but it's not something that, I have tons of it, at home and in the lab, and I don't take it like every day, but it's something that could be used like periodically in an acute scenario, I think.
Tom, man, every time I see you, I'm amazed. And
great to see you, man.
I appreciate you, man.
Great to be here. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's a wrap. Thank you very much for tuning into the Muscle Intelligence Podcast. As you hear, there was an enormous amount of information exchanged right there. Some of the key actionables that I extracted personally from Dom that I'm going to apply to my life is looking to move in the direction of doing 7 days of fasting or 7 days of protein-sparing modified fast, where Dominic says he tries to stay under 500 calories to start eradicating these natural cancer cells that develop in all of us. Cancers develop for a number of different reasons, specifically when we start to move away from metabolic health, or maybe there's tears or breaks in the DNA strands that ultimately start to lead to these misfolded proteins. So something that I'm going to do in my life, probably once a quarter, maybe once every 4 months, is do a 3 to 7 day fast. If you're not already doing something like this, definitely consult with a certified medical practitioner. Make sure your health is right. I do not advocate fasting for people who are metabolically unhealthy. Why? Because oftentimes, as Dominic mentioned this podcast, you can end up breaking down more muscle than you do fat, and that's not a good idea. We want to start allowing the body to be in a healthy state, which means relatively low inflammatory state, relatively low glucose and insulin states before we start moving in the direction of something like fasting. So this is something you want to work toward. You may take 1 to 3 months of metabolic optimization, which is a low carbohydrate diet, optimal aerobic fitness, regular consistent training, optimal sleep patterns, before you move in the direction of fasting. So do not jump into something extreme. You're setting yourself up for failure. Ultimately can do some harm. Another thing that I'm going to use from Dominic is ketones. Audacious nutrition ketones is something that I'm going to put in. Him and I had a great conversation after the podcast around how I can most effectively utilize his supplements. He actually suggested that taking one package consistently every workout for 30 days and track my strength numbers from the beginning to the end of that cycle. That's something I plan to start very, very soon. So, as well as the innumerable other amazing benefits from this podcast, those are the 2 things that I plan to action right away. If you're someone who is going to action something, I would love to see the comments below. If you guys have any amazing things that you've extracted, I want to see how you apply it, what you've taken away from it, and ultimately helping each other live your greatest life in a body you love. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here as we shift our direction of the Muscle Intelligence Podcast to helping you live longer, helping you live stronger, and ultimately living your best life. Have a great day. See you in the next episode.